Hello everybody, welcome back to another reasonable price prediction, the series where we try to figure out where your favorite altcoins could be headed. Now today we are back with Chainlink, and in our last video we spoke a lot about what happened before the halving, and specifically we spoke about this 1, 2, 3, 4 move that Chainlink made, where moving out of our Wyckoff, which is represented by the orange. If you're not sure what a Wyckoff is, go check out my last link video, I explain it in that. But ultimately we see our Wyckoff play out to a T and we move up to the upside. And we set our first 1, which is a wick where we finally find resistance. We set our 2, which is a pullback, kind of a local low. And then after that we make strong moves to the upside to our 3 and then down to our 4. And the 4 is the same level as the 1. So you can see it makes a step up basically, because the new support becomes the old resistance becomes the new support. And we said that this could very likely play out again. Now taking a look at what has happened, we can see that that did in fact play out, because I was making videos kind of during this time really on Link. October was when I first started and when we had this first move to the upside, and I was saying it's played out very much like last time. Both of these are Wyckoff moves, and I explain it in those videos, so if you want to know why, go check them out. But we have our Wyckoff move to the upside, we get our 1, we get our 2 over here, we have a strong move up to our 3, which sets a new resistance, and then we come back down to our previous resistance that is now our new support. And we can see if we zoom in, we wicked down to this 4, but we didn't even close there. We had a strong recovery back up. So it does show that it's an important level and that Link has ultimately played out the same way. Now looking at this, we can obviously see it's slightly different. First of all, what stands out is the orange time zone here. Obviously, we spent much longer in this time. Obviously, our Wyckoff took much longer to play out this cycle than it did Link's first cycle. We can see if we, and before I actually show that, we can see that we spent a long period of time in this range with our 1 and our 3 as our limits. You know, our 3 set our upper band and our 1 and 4 was our support. We can see that leading up to the halving, at least anyway, we will have spent much less time operating within this range. And in fact, I don't believe we'll stay in this range for much longer, but I'll explain why in a minute. But if we actually measure how long we kind of spent in total down here, so if we measure from the start of the Wyckoff to the halving, we can see this brings us here to about 113 weeks. Now, if we take a look over here, how long we roughly spent, we'll see that it's a bit shorter, but still 102 weeks, 103 weeks roughly is a very similar time frame over a long stretch. Plus 10 weeks is still a lot, obviously that's 70 days, but in market cycles it's forgivable to have differences of this amount. So we can see that more or less they have played out very similarly over the same period of time. Now the percentage moves will be different of course, and the amount of time we spent at each stage has differed, but overall we've gotten to the same place in the same way over the same period of time. So naturally the kind of next question is, do we spend a similar amount of time like we did last cycle at this 1 and 3 range where we operate within this range for a while? Or is it that just once we cross the halving, Litecoin sees good price action? And now me personally, from having looked at lots of altcoins for many hours for the last 2-3 years, I would argue that most likely Litecoin will just see green. I don't think we'll stay within this range for very long. I think this will basically be it. A few weeks after the halving, maybe June, July time, we make a move up and we break past this 3 level like we did last time. And hey, maybe we even make a similar move again like we did here where we have a 1, 2, 3, 4 and we set our old resistance as a new support. I actually don't know, to be honest with you. But one thing I would be comfortable assuming for myself is that the halving often, well, basically always has been the tide that raises all ships. The halving creates scarcity, and while the price might drop on the day or on that week, the months that follow often provide good, positive price movements for the whole crypto space. And you can basically go back to any halving, and if you take like the total market cap of the whole of the crypto space a month before the halving, and you take the total market cap of the crypto space 3 or 4 months after the halving, there's a big difference, there's a jump, it increases. So I personally have no reason to assume this time will be different. Now that doesn't mean that we can't have the halving, make a move to the upside, and then operate within a range that's at a slightly higher elevated level for the same period of time, we might see basically this amount of time, this sort of however long it was, 37 weeks, we might just see that play out here at a higher price, basically. I'm not saying that's, impossible. I'm not even saying it's unlikely. It could definitely happen. But me personally, I don't think we'll spend too much longer at this sort of sub 23, above 16 level, personally. Now, I could of course be wrong. I would also assume that we are very unlikely to drop down below our current support of $16. I think, we will not go below $16 for a very long time, and potentially ever again, because if we take a look at what happened last time with Litecoin, with Chainlink, we saw that the upper resistance, so the resistance set in by 3, then became the next cycle low, basically. So we never came back down to these levels, and if Link is going to follow this pattern indefinitely, which is probably foolish to assume, but, for the next 5-6 years at least, hopefully, we can maybe hope that Link, the next cycle, the $23 is its low, and maybe the cycle after that it makes a move of up to $45 and that's our low. But that's moving very far out and assuming very many things, so I'm going to steer clear of that. Last thing before we move to the Bitcoin pair, if we take a look at what Link did during the halving, basically last cycle, we can see it was a bit below its upper band. It was $5 here and it crossed the halving at about $3.80, $3.75 here in fact. And if we take how far of a move it made, it did a 13x basically from halving to all-time high. Now, I would not expect Link to make this type of a move again, because if it does, it's going to be pretty crazy in my opinion. If we assume that we drop down a bit from the halving, our upper band currently is $23. If we move down to, I'll go to 1990, so about $20. And if we move a 13x, you can see we're basically stretching the limits of this chart, and it will put Rune at about $285. I don't think this is something that will come to fruition, at least not this cycle, maybe many cycles down the road. But me personally, I don't think it will happen this time. And that is just because while Rune has performed amazingly, the last cycle, I mean, if you take kind of the low to the high, you basically became a millionaire. If you put anything like 10 grand in, you basically became a millionaire if you timed it from here to there. Very unlikely, but still, the potential was there. You could have become a millionaire off Link. I don't think we're going to see those types of gains again. I think the reason Link did so well this time is because it was so unique. There weren't many other oracles. There weren't other layer zeros like Chainlink during this time, especially not like 2019. Now loads have popped up since, and they've stolen market share and competition from Link, and I think that will ultimately affect its gains. It still is the OG, but also what we've seen with OGs in the crypto space is if they're not Bitcoin or Ethereum, they kind of seem to lag and definitely trail off in terms of what they're capable of as time goes on. But again, it's just one of those things that we kind of have to wait and see before we can, of course, definitively say what will happen. We might not even get a bull run over the next few months. There's a lot of talk of a retracement. I've often spoke about a sort of pullback at the halving as well. While you could argue that this is what we've seen over the last week, where we've had, ultimately, if we go from high to low, in the last week we've had a move of negative 30%. I still think there could be more to go. I think the Link will be one of the best to hold up during this time, just because of how well it's held before, and once it sort of sets a range, it doesn't like to break below it or above it, which is of course a good thing and a bad thing. But anyway, looking at Link and Bitcoin, we are now at a very interesting time for Link, especially on the Bitcoin bet, because the last video, or the video before, I think I proposed a kind of idea that Link rallies up previous to the halving, and then once the halving happens, it gets one last leg in and then loses value against Bitcoin much earlier compared to other altcoins. And I kind of proposed the hypothesis, do we see Link rally for either the 103 weeks like we did here? And if we take this out, that would mean Link would rally up until mid-June of 2025, which would most likely put us at the peak of the bull run. Or does Link simply rally for a few weeks after the halving, 13 weeks after the halving? And if that's true, it means we've kind of stopped rallying July of this year. So two very different scenarios, two very different possibilities that are both equally likely to play out. And if we take a look at what's happened with Link so far, I am starting to lean more towards the rally ending much sooner after the halving than for a set amount of time. Because if we see what has happened with the link recently, it's currently come under a lot of resistance and it hasn't been able to push through. So first of all, we kind of visited this top again and got rejected. And then even as the rest of the crypto space was doing really well, Link got rejected again and even came down to this lower band, basically setting a new lower band for this trend up. So it's also setting a much less severe increase in price, like price trend. It's turning it more horizontal, which means less gains over the long term. Now, this isn't a nail in the coffin. We often see this with Bitcoin altcoin pairs, especially around the halving. It's an extremely volatile time. And if we zoom in at what happened last time, we basically had a very similar movement of a drop of 40% leading up to the halving on Link Bitcoin pair. And now this one, I'm pretty sure, is 40% as well. So you could argue that this is just that move playing out again. I don't think that's unreasonable to assume at all. The key difference, of course, being that we didn't battle a resistance here and we didn't get rejected really from a key resistance. We just wicked up and had a pull down. But ultimately, again, after the halving, we saw an immediate rally with Link on its Bitcoin pair. And I don't think this time it will be too different either. I think we will probably continue, well, we'll probably see a bounce here realistically. And maybe if we zoom in again, last cycle, you can see that even after this 40% rally, Link had a strong bounce, but it still had a pullback basically immediately afterwards. And you can see on the halving, Link actually drops that week quite drastically. But then immediately afterwards, Link rallies up and puts in its final leg. You could argue that we get another pull down into the halving. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. If we get kind of a couple of weeks here, 2 or 3 weeks of good price action, maybe we climb 20% on the Bitcoin pair, and then we have another bit of a tail off into the halving and we drop down 10%. And then by the time we're after the halving, we're somewhere around 3,000 Satoshis. Maybe then we can rally up and see what happens. If we take how far we moved last time from the halving to our high, Link basically made a 273% move against Bitcoin, which isn't terrible. And if we kind of assume that 3,000 Satoshis is where we might cross the halving, if we make a 270% move, it doesn't put us too far away from where we were previously, setting us at about 11,000 Satoshis, with our previous all-time high being 16,000. Now, still a bit of a jump, but there's always wiggle room there. You can make an extra 1,000 Satoshis high, you might not reach. You might only get to 10,000. It's, of course, within a range. This is not an exact science. You can't predict the exact price on the exact day. So again, just something to be aware of. But again, coming back to the fact that after the halving, Link rallies, along with most other altcoins. And most other altcoins, like we see, Link gets a pullback almost immediately afterwards. The difference was with the Link is that it didn't rally against Bitcoin during sort of the altcoin summer. 2021, famous crypto bull market, Link didn't really do too much on its Bitcoin pair and generally trended down for that time. So Link might surprise us and continue to trend up for longer until mid-2025 on its Bitcoin pair, if it decides to trend up for the same amount of time, or it might trend up to mid-July this year if it decides to trend up for a similar amount of time like it did last time after the halving. Open to interpretation, however you want to expect it to play out. You can of course expect it to play out that way. Ultimately, I don't think Link is a coin to hold during a bull run. I think it's a coin to hold not during a bear run or a bull run. It's a coin to hold in between, because I think generally it does well against Bitcoin, against boring times, or historically it has anyway. And even this last kind of bear run since 2022 onwards, Link has dropped, but it's held pretty well. And even the current price, it's above where we were back in May of 2022. So even if it has fluctuated quite a lot, it hasn't fluctuated within a crazy bound. There seems to be some kind of rhythm to it where we set highs, we set lows, and we kind of stay within them. We could just see something like this play out here, where we had a couple of months of good price action here, followed by a pullback. We might get that again here, where we've had a few weeks of good price action followed by a pullback. I don't think so. I'm just saying it's a possibility. Ultimately, I think Link is going to be in a good place for at least a few months from now. But it's not an altcoin I will be holding during the peaks of the bull run. Well, I don't plan to anyway. It's a coin that I think is a decent store of value during turbulent times, but when the times get good, I'm not particularly interested in holding too much of it. Anyway, that's going to wrap up the video, guys. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. That's totally fine too. Comment down below if there's anything I missed, or if you think there's something interesting coming up that everyone might be interested in hearing. Always love hearing from you guys, so please talk to me in the comments. Thanks very much. Take care and peace.